Hello, my name is Lauren Perry, and today I'm here with Dr. Reba Hollingsworth. So Dr. Hollingsworth, can you tell me a little bit about growing up in Delaware?
I've traced my mother's side of the family back to beyond 1790, right here in Kent County, Delaware, and my father back beyond 1800s in Maryland and southern Delaware and Kent County. And I've lived here most of my life. In my family household, there were 7 children, and my mother and dad, 9 of us, living in a 3-room house, not a 3-bedroom house, but a 3-room house. So we really had to learn how to respect each other and respect each other's property. And my father absolutely forbade us from arguing and fussing with each other, because he told us that if you can't get along with each other here in this house, you cannot be expected to get along with people in the street. So we could not fuss and fight with our brothers and sisters, which taught us how to negotiate when we had an argument or a disagreement without having to get angry with each other. And so it was nice. I was the oldest girl of the 7 children. I had one brother who was older, so I've been grown all my life.
So what was your education like growing up and at Delaware State University?
Okay. I grew up in Delaware at a time when they did not have but one high school in the entire state for black students, and that was at Howard High School in Wilmington. And people in Delaware and other places in the country really did not value education as much as they should have, and especially not for blacks. As a matter of fact, there was a law on the books of the state of Delaware until I think 1972, which said that blacks only needed enough education to read, write, and count a bit. So my thing is, if that's all the education I needed, I didn't need any schooling at all, because I had already learned that at home with my mother and dad. But as far as education formally is concerned, I wanted to be, first I wanted to be a doctor, but I knew that that was out of the question because we didn't have any money. But I wanted to do something other than work in a factory and clean chickens and that kind of thing. So I made sure that I got away from school. So as a 10th grade student, 2 other girls from my class and I rented a room here in Dover and went to Booker T School for the 10th grade, because Delaware State had just moved its 10th grade to Booker T that same year. And then we came out here to Delaware State College as 11th and 12th graders. And it was quite different, because as a 10th grader, I was completely on my own to come and go as I wished. And we came out here and got this long list of all of the do's and don'ts. You could not go off campus but once a month. And you could only go home if you had a note from your parents saying that you could come. I could not visit my roommate and friends unless their parents also sent a note saying that I could visit them. We could only go as far as the bridge down here on State College Road or out to the Highway 13. So we pretty much lived on campus. And since it was a small campus, about 200 plus people, you knew everybody. And so it was like a big family living out here at that time. So even the president, Dr. Gregg, at that time, was like the father, I guess, to all of us, because if they didn't have something I liked in the dining hall, because I did hair and I was in and out of their homes all the time, I would go over to Dr. Gregg's house and he would say, "Naomi, give Reba something to eat," and so I didn't have to worry about that. But it was a nice experience.
So although you had many restrictions while at Delaware State University, can you tell me one of the fondest memories you had?
Well, as I said, the fondest memory, I guess, is because it's the fact that we were small enough to be a whole family. And so you knew everybody on campus and they knew you. Also because, well, I didn't say this earlier, but I wanted to tell you that the Dean of Women, the matron, actually was my mother's classmate. And so that meant that I had to kind of be on my P's and Q's at all times, plus the fact that I was not going to disappoint my parents by doing anything that would have gotten demerits at that time. Is what they got. If you got so many demerits, you automatically got expelled, and I didn't want that to happen. And you got demerits for things like being someplace you had no business, like if a girl went to a boys' dormitory or vice versa, that was an automatic expulsion. If a girl got pregnant on campus at the time, that was an automatic expulsion for the girl. And I never thought it was fair that the boys stay. But I just didn't want to have those kinds of infractions attached to my name. So I tried to do the things that were right. And because I did hair, I schedule most of my faculty appointments after 7 o'clock at night, since we were supposed to be in the dormitory at that time as a high school student. When we got into college, we could stay out until 9 o'clock. But 9 o'clock, when I had been as a 10th grader on my own to do what I wanted to and come in when I wanted to. But you learn to adjust to the situations you're in. So my fondest memory is just being here, actually.
That's so interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about some issues you faced as an African American woman in regards to fighting for basic rights like the right to vote?
Yes, we had to fight for almost everything that we got. I can remember as a child my dad coming home from work with tears in his eyes because he had actually trained a white young man to do the work as a cement finisher, which is what he was doing. And this young man eventually became his boss. And even while my dad was training him, he was making more money than my dad. That was not right. You know, kinds of things that I've always fought for what I thought was an infraction on our rights, and I let people know that, to the point that sometimes I got into trouble as a result of it. Trouble meaning that I've even been patted on my head and asking by people, how do you know so much? Insulting kinds of things like that. As far as voting is concerned, the first time we voted, you had to be 21 at that time instead of 18. And I was already married because I had married my husband when I was a junior here at Delaware State. And so in 1948 was the first time that I was able to vote. And we were living in Wilmington at the time. We had registered in the precinct that they had assigned to us because of our address. But when we went to vote, they told us we were in the wrong precinct. So they sent us to the next precinct up. And when we got there, of course, they did not have our names on the list. So we had to go up to the district office on French Street. And it took us almost all day to register so that we could get back to put our vote in. By this time, we were a little bit disgusted. The insulting thing, however, was when we got back to the precinct, they gave us a marked ballot and asked us to bring our unmarked ballots out to them. That was a real insult, you know, and I just started running my mouth to the point that they actually put my husband and me in the same booth to vote at the same time so they could hurry up and get us out of there. And that incident was what really caused my husband and me to vote, to register as independents rather than for either party. And we realized too that whichever party was in office at the time was representing me, whether I was an independent or Republican or Democrat. And so I just use my voice for whatever I need, and if there's something going on that I don't like, I'll either write a letter to the editor, write to the legislature to pick up the telephone and call them, or go down to Lake Hall and talk to them. And so that's what I do.
So it's nice that you stand up for yourself.
I stand up for myself because when we were growing up, my dad told us, the folks are as good as the people. And he said, you don't have to bend over and cower to anybody. And you have to be proud of yourself and carry yourself with pride. And so I grew up that way. I mean, I didn't walk off the side of the sidewalk or to look down because I saw somebody who was white. And he told us, you know, look people in the eye and talk to them, you know, because people are equal, everybody's the same. And so I grew up that way. I wasn't always treated as equal, but I knew in my heart that God had created all of us equally. And so I was one of God's children.
I agree with you. As a member of Delta Sigma Theta, can you tell me a little bit about the role that the organization has played in regards to the 19th Amendment and just voting rights for women?
Well, the sorority actually, as you well know, was all AKA members at the time. The 22 founders of Delta Sigma Theta sorority were members of the AKA sorority. But the AKAs at that time did not want to get involved with the civil rights movement, and they didn't want to get involved with the women's suffrage movement, which was really prevalent at the time. And so these 22 women actually decided that they wanted to form a chapter, first of all, that actually spoke of the Greek letters, Delta Sigma Theta rather than Alpha Kappa Alpha, which is AKA. And so they wanted to be involved as well in civil rights issues, and so they tried to convince everybody that, including the professors and people at Howard University, that this is what they wanted to do. And they founded Delta Sigma Theta sorority in 1913 and got involved with the civil rights movement at that time.
And what is the sorority, well, as a member, what are you doing today to continue the legacy and the involvement in the voting rights movement?
Well, I became a Delta 62 years ago. As a matter of fact, I was the first initiate in Dover Alumni Chapter here in Dover, Delaware. And I was involved also in helping to charter Epsilon Alpha Chapter here on campus. And so I knew the importance of having, continuing the legacy of the sorority for one thing, because I believed in its tenets and its morals and things. And I wanted to make sure that other women who became Deltas wanted to do the same kind of thing, because I think we all have an obligation to make sure that all citizens, okay, get the best that they can rather than having to do without. I think it's a crime in this country when we have people living on the streets with no place to live and we walk over them. And so I think that as a Delta, as a human, as a wife, as a mother, and you folks say women of color, but I don't use that term that much because I can remember when we were called everything from Negro, colored, and I don't think we need to be identified by anything except who we are. And I am Reba Ross Hollingsworth, and that's my name. So, but anything, I just think that we have an obligation to help each other to achieve the best they can.
Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. And I know it may be hard to remember, but do you remember maybe any of the names of any members who were really prominent during that women's rights time period, or who even had a bigger platform?
Well, I had the privilege of knowing 18 of the 22 founders. And as a matter of fact, Ethel Cuff Black was a professor here at Delaware State College and taught my mother when she was a student here. And I was invited, as a matter of fact, to her 100th birthday party in New York because she knew that I had known one of her students and was part of that. I was also privileged to work with a lot of the founders, a lot of the women who were involved, like Frankie Freeman, of course. Most of the people, because I served as a national chair of the National Nominating Committee for a term. I was also on the National Constitutional Bylaws Committee for about 12 years, and so I know the constitutional bylaws and all of the membership intake, because I also helped with that, doing revision of the membership intake process. So I got to work with a lot of these people from the national level, and as such I was able to be involved with Frankie Freeman, for instance, with a lot of her work. Got to visit her in her home in St. Louis, and Lillian Benbow, who was one of the presidents, a lot of the honorary members, as a matter of fact, Lena Horne. So as a member, if you're involved, and I was, then you get to work with a lot of people who are doing good things.
Yes. And can you tell us a little bit about Shape to Its Purpose? I know it's a very popular book. So
yeah, Shape to Its Purpose is one of the histories of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Actually, I think this was the second history that was written. There was one that was written, from what I understand, in 1986 or 84, but I had not been able to read that. I just saw a note that it was written. But I did get to meet Mary Elizabeth Roman, who wrote this book. And so she actually captured pretty much the history that could be public for everybody. So I would urge everybody to read this book. The second one was written by Paula Giddings, which is In Search of Sisterhood, which is a later version. And I also got to meet Paula Giddings, the author. And I think that if we read this, you'll have a real good understanding of why Deltas are the largest organization nationally and internationally, and why we are involved. Actually, we have more elected officials nationally than any other sorority. And so that in itself, to me, speaks volumes for our purpose.
And my last question is, do you have any, I guess, life lessons that you could just share with me and other women who are going to be watching this as well?
I can do that, but it'll take longer than you have for right now. But, I think the most thing that I can tell you is to remember who you are, and don't let anybody define you, because you know what you want to do and you know what your experiences have been. Nobody else can dictate that but you. And so there's a big wide world out here for you to do anything that you want to do, as long as it's positive. If it's negative, you can do that as well, but the consequences will be great. So decide that you're going to do the best life that you can live.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to sit down and
Thank
interviewing
you. It's
with
my
me.
pleasure.